Welcome to our live event. We are live bringing you some small projects just about every other Tuesday. Um, those projects that we can use up fabric, we can be creative, and it doesn't take us months and months to complete. I'm your instructor, Colleen Tauke, and we are going to be putting together today the travel time shoe bag. It is inspired because I have a trip coming up, and whenever you decide to pack, it's always like, oh, I know I need to take at least one more pair of shoes. And the shoes have been worn outside, and we really don't want that rubbing up against our clean clothes as we pack. So I decided it was time to use up some scraps, make something useful. Doesn't have to be super fancy, but it will also give you a place to practice your machine quilting. And I know as a quilter, when I was working on projects, I wanted to be able to quilt them myself. And my learning curve was kind of all over the place. And I know that when I make a big quilt, it's hard to put those into the machine and learn some of the skills that we need. But when we have smaller projects, that's the perfect place to practice. So by creating these small projects, you find a place to practice your machine quilting on your domestic machine. So we're going to be working on the travel time shoe bag today. Remember to pop in and let us know where you're watching from. And maybe if you have in mind some scraps of things that you just couldn't part with because they're just too pretty or there's too many pieces left, maybe one of those is going to be your travel time shoe bag creation. So the QR code is up. It's going to let you download the pattern. So just shoot your camera across that. It'll grab that little QR code image and it'll take you to the pattern if you haven't downloaded already. The pattern's only just a couple of pages so that we give you some really streamlined instructions and give you the supplies to get started on your project. So we have whenever you pop in, I'll try to note who pops in and tells us where they're watching from. Today's project was something that I had leftovers from a project I was doing for a client, and he didn't want the fabric back, the extra stuff back, the strips and pieces. And actually, I mated strips from one project, the coin quilt that I did recently, with a stars quilt that had some really fun tropical prints. And when I laid them next together, they looked fabulous together. So this pink in here came out, popped out in this strip that I'd used in my coin quilt. And I thought, well, why not use them up? Because otherwise those strips are going to end up in the bottom of a bin and just live there for eternity. So we've got, let's see, Geraldine saying hello from Houston. Bridget is coming in from, she's at the dentist office in Switzerland. I love it that we can join together wherever we are on the planet. Joanna is joining us from Brazil, and Dawn says hello from Washington State. I can't read the rest of Washington. So let us know where you're watching from. It's fun to see everybody's names come in. Now, I'm going to remove my shoes from this so we can kind of look at the structure of this. You know, those tennis shoes that we're going to need for the walking around when we go on our trip, those need to get packed. So we need a place to put them. I did not put a closure at the top. That could be your option if you decide you want to do that. But most of the time, shoes slip in. You don't really need to worry about them sliding out because it's fabric, and fabric kind of holds to the shoe as you put it in. So you don't have to worry about them sliding out really easily. So it's just a boxed kind of bag that we're going to create today. And the easiest way to go about this, and I want to talk about strips too. So just a second here. If you're like me, you've created projects and you have leftover strips. Those pre-cuts were a premium when you purchased them. And you may not have used everything up. So it doesn't need to be just two colors. Maybe you have enough strips in the leftovers here that I have that were just too pretty to get rid of. I have some really fun oranges and turquoises and teals that I could do an alternating kind of pattern in using up these strips. I have some other Amy Butler strips that were great florals. So you choose which of your strips, or maybe you want to cut strips that you have leftover fabrics from. A lot of times patterns will include at least an eighth to a third quarter of a yard maybe in each of the fabrics, so that in case you have a miscut, you have enough fabric to complete the quilt. But that also leaves you with some strips left over that you could cut 2.5 strips out of. So these are made with 2.5-inch strips. One of them will even then make your binding. So it's a very fast and easy project to put together. Now, I did have some more of this fun floral print, and I used it actually on the inside too. So I'm really talking about using up your scraps in a project like this. So you cut a piece of batting. Again, you probably have trimmed battings from previous quilts and you have strips left and you're like, can't throw those away either. And I literally will use up just about every strip I own by even joining them together if I need to. And we have videos at National Quilter Circle about putting batting together and how to join those so that you can make a larger piece and use up all of those pieces of batting. But you're cutting approximately a 14 by 22 or 20.5-inch rectangle. It doesn't have to be exact at this point, but this will be big enough to make a shoe bag that accommodates about a size 7 shoe. So if you happen to be a little bit larger in the shoe department and you need more length to get your shoe into the bag, you're going to want to increase that a bit if you were a size 9 or a size 10. And I know some of you are size 5s with teeny tiny little feet, and then some of us have more substantial feet. So you'll want to double check the width or the length of your shoe to accommodate your size of shoe. But probably anywhere from 14 to 16 inches wide will do most everyone's. And now tennis shoes paired together fit in this size bag. Now, if you were taking, say, maybe you're going on a tropical little adventure. This fabric makes me think of tropical. And you want to take a couple pairs of sandals. 2 pairs of sandals will also fit into this bag. So you could always pair and put 2 pair in one bag. So 20.5 by approximately 14 for your batting and your what's going to be, I said backing, but actually it's kind of the lining of this. I get used to using terms that are more for quilts that lay flat, but this is going to be the interior of our bag. We have, let's see, some Dawn saying hello from Washington. Oh, I had Dawn before. Kathy saying hello from Wisconsin, and Madeline hello from the Netherlands. Wonderful. We're glad that you're here. Chris says hello from Michigan. Okay. Once we have that, then it's to determine some strips that we can use for the outer portion of our bag. And I found these that were left over from the set that I picked the pink out of, and I could pick any of these colors if I wanted to do a very bright outer crayon colored, kind of those pure colors. I kind of thought maybe I would go a different direction on this one, and those turquoisey blues in that, I thought maybe I'd use that on the outside of the bag. So we're going to flip this over. We've got our interior fabric. It's going to be the inside of our bag, our batting. And let's see, got to make sure that I basted my batting and my interior fabric the wrong direction. Did you know batting has a right side and a wrong side? The right side of batting has kind of a dimply look to it. You can see where I use batting that has scrim on it that makes it very stable for machine quilting. And the dimple side always goes up, and the less pretty side, sometimes it has more of a pebbly look to it, is the side with the scrim, that part that kind of stabilizes the batting. That portion should go towards the backing. Since we're going to stitch on this side, we're going to call this the top, the right side. Now, I've got my strips here, and I can cut as I go to position those, but I kind of need to know where the center of my bag is. So we know that it's approximately 20.5 to 21 inches wide. We can always trim later. It doesn't have to be super exact, but I'm going to find the center, which would be about 20 and a quarter or so. And I'm going to kind of give myself a gauge here so that you can trim your batting even with your interior fabric if you like. It may make it just a little bit easier to work, but I'm going to mark that center portion of my width with a friction pen. This will disappear when heat hits it, so that it's going to be on the inside of the project, so nobody will actually see that ever anyway. And then I note that you want to go 1/4 inch to the right of that, because we're going to do a kind of a flip and stitch. We want our flip and stitch portion to be centered on this piece. So I'm going to make a second line that's about 1/4 inch, or as close to 1/4 inch to, wait, did I say? Yeah, to the left. I'm sorry, to the left of this. And this is going to be my, the edge that I am going to put my actual edge of my fabric. This will be like the stitching line, but I needed a reference point of where to start. So let's pick out some of these fun strips. And the fun thing about stitch and flip is that, yes, it is quilted when we're done. And but if you want to add more quilting and you want that place to practice your quilting, this is the place to do it. Now, I'm going to be covering this entire surface of batting, and we do have scissors. We use rotary cutters a lot when we're quilting, but scissors work to just snip the length of my strip that I want to use. And I'm aligning the raw edge here with that second line that we put in, the one that shifted over a bit. So that's where the edge of my strip is at. Now I need to pick the second strip, the piece that I'm going to flip and stitch onto this. And you can audition ahead of time. Sometimes I like to lay out my fabrics so that I kind of alternate lights and darks, different patterns. This set of strips is just so much fun that let's just audition them out and have a little fun, because that's the way I actually put mine together so that you can see the process. Okay, there. It covers, but our seam allowances are going to be in there, so it's going to be a little shorter when we're all done. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that gives me half. So we are going to then just cut our pieces. See how we are kind of taking a break from all our exact cutting and just having a little fun in the sewing room. So we have our first pieces kind of ready to go. And I actually laid mine out on my ironing surface in my studio upstairs when I was working in this, because once I had them in the order I wanted, I didn't want to forget how I put them together. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to start working out one side of our bag. And we're going to we've got that one in place. I've got just a tiny bit of spray base on my batting, so it's just a little bit tacky. Your batting may be lofty enough that it doesn't want to shift, but a little bit of spray base can help. Or you can use just a few pins. We're going to put right sides together, first and second strip, right sides together. Now, the thing you have to remember is which side is where the marked line is at, because that's where we want to put our 1/4 inch seam. Now, this is not a very long length, and so I have not placed my walking foot on here, but you can use a walking foot. The only issue with a walking foot becomes that it's hard to find the 1/4 inch seam allowance on a walking foot for most people. So I'm just going to throw in a couple of pins so that my strip on that top strip doesn't shift as I'm sewing. And then I'm going to go ahead and join that piece. And this is where you're going to be able to see that this goes together so fast. This is a fun process. Just kind of, like I said, a break from all our exact stitching that we do. Now, I'm using contrasting threads so you can see where I'm stitching. So think about this. The thread on the top is going to be in the interior of this. You're never going to see it. But the thread they're using in the bottom, maybe you may want to take note of what thread you have in your bobbin so that if you want it to match, or if you'd rather it contrasted, change out your bobbin to get the thread look that you want in this project. If you want it to just melt in, you may want it to be a gray or a cream. If it's a dark fabric, you may want to do a thread match for that interior fabric. Okay. Once we get this out, always kind of flip it back to the orientation that we started. Now we're going to flip this strip open all the way to that stitching line because we want all that pretty fabric to show. And because I put just a tad bit of spray based on there, my strip really wants to just kind of work like a felt board, just stick right in place. And it's not like it's, you know, a lot, but just tacky enough that it holds its place. Deborah says, hello from South Carolina, actually working on the mystery quilt. Wonderful. We are glad that you're joining us for the mystery quilt. Rebecca says, good morning. We are having a little fun. I know the mystery quilt is on a lot of people's minds, and I tried to make the mystery quilt not so difficult so that you would have time to maybe do some other little quilting and sewing projects along the way. Now, once you have strip 2 in place, went back over to my laid out strips here, and I'm going to put strip 3 in place. Again, right sides together. Those few pins did help keep the fabrics from shifting. So I'm going to, not usually a big pinner, but because the lower strip is kind of tacky in place, this keeps the top strip from shifting with the presser foot. So we're going to roll this around because we want to stitch on this side. So we're going to turn this so that we have access to lining up our 1/4 inch seam with the raw edges that are stacked on top of each other, and go ahead and stitch this one. Now, I put my pins in perpendicular to my stitching line so that as I approach them, I can easily take them out. I have noticed, and that my method for pinning might come from my garment sewing background. I have seen people put pins out in the outer edges where it doesn't even interfere with the stitching or the presser foot or the needle. I think that comes from maybe a different generation of sewers out there and people coming to quilting, maybe not with a garment sewing background, but just place your pins so that the fabrics don't shift too much. Like I said, if they do just a little tiny bit, in this kind of a situation, we can't really go back and forth in directions as we add our strips because we do need to know where our 1/4 inch seam is. So we're kind of always approaching from the same direction here. We've got that second one on, and then we're going to go for the third. And I'm just going to leave this laying so that I can line up my pieces. We've got, we've got a couple of. Betty says, good morning from Denver, Colorado. And Robin says, hello from Brooklyn, New York. So we've got from a state where with a lot of mountains, and we've got somebody from the city. We're glad that you're joining us. We're working on a fun little travel bag for our shoes. So that, and you might find that maybe this is an inspiration for a different kind of project altogether. Maybe you want to create this as a bag for a thread catcher for your sewing machine. You could make it a little shorter and make a thread catcher or a little bin for storing things in your sewing space. It's just an idea, a jumping off point for you to be creative. Use up those pre-cut strips, or maybe cut up the scraps you have into strips so that you can then be creative with something else. Sometimes we have inspiration that takes us in a lot of different directions. This could also work as placemats because you think about the shape that you're creating here, it looks just like a placemat. So again, a pattern that basically is just an an idea that you can then take and blossom into many things. And on the back, I'll show you my red thread that I'm sewing with. You can see the red going across that. That's why I mentioned you want to be aware of what you have in your bobbin of your machine, so that if you would like the thread to not show as much, you can pick a more generic color of thread. On this kind of print, I would probably suggest maybe a creamy white. It could be a light yellow. But if you want it to be something fun and you really want to see it, maybe a hot pink even would work, or a teal would work on this. It really is Quilter's choice on the kinds of threads that we use when we're creating projects. Okay, let's get this last one. And I wanted to show you that that was the number of strips we had laid out. And it looked like it was going to cover, correct? But, of course, when we take all of our seam allowances out, we need one more strip. So it's easy just to pick up another piece of fabric from our strips. You can repeat fabrics. You can alternate like I did on this one. The bright color strip, the florals were actually pieces I cut from leftover strips from another project, or from a border off of a project. And once we get that last strip on this direction, then we'll go back and we'll cover this side of the project. I want to get to the outer edge here, so let's add one more strip. And everyone's 1/4 inch seam allowance is unique. So if your seam allowance takes up a little bit more fabric, makes your bag just a little bit different in size, it's okay. Still will work out. And when we get to the whole thing covered, we'll go back in and we'll trim the outer edge of our project. See, now that we have everything covered, we do the same thing, flip and stitch until you cover the second side. I'm going to go in and I want to show you the trimming process so that you'll know how that goes and how to box that bottom corner. So I'm using, since I cut my lining fabric to the dimension I wanted, I'm just going to go back and trim the outer edge. If things are absolutely perfect, again, you can cut your batting in advance so it all matches up. I just happened to grab a scrap this morning and said, we'll do fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. Actually, I'll show you the bottom of my completed bag. I didn't totally match up my strips. And I don't think the interior of my suitcase will ever care. Because this is a project for you, unless you're giving it as a gift. Maybe you have a travel companion you're making a project for. But, okay, let's go ahead and trim all the way. I don't have a large ruler up here because I don't have that much space to work. I'm going to pretend that I have everything pieced on the front, and I'm going to trim up everything so that I don't have any excess strips hanging off the edge. And then, see, when we get down to batting like this, then it's time to throw it away. But when we have big chunks, it's time to find a way to use them up. Okay, if I had this entire thing covered with strips, I would then go right sides together because we're counting this as right side. And I would then seam this together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And since it's going to be the interior of a bag, I went back then and zigzagged with a wide zigzag the cut edges so I don't get fraying on any of the interior of the bag. Now, I have seen bag makers do a really fancy finish on their seam allowances on the interior of a bag. Sometimes they go back and they cover with the seam allowances with strips that look like binding so that all of the seam allowances are encased, which is great. It really depends on your comfort of how you want to finish this edge off. If you want to make a little binding piece that covers this so it's really pretty on the inside, or whether or not you just want to zigzag that edge, I will turn my bag so that you can see my zigzagged edge. And I did it in bright pink thread so you could see it. And there is my seam down the back of my bag that has that zigzagged edge so that the threads, all the cut edges are kind of encased. If you have a serger, this would be a great place to serge that edge so that it's nice and clean. I did go back then and stitch down along the edge so that it lays flat. Totally up to you how you want to finish that portion. But we need to box these bottom corners. When you get your seam done here down the back of the bag, so what I'm doing is folding it in half, finding the center, and then matching the fold with my seam so that I know that my seam will be on the back side of my bag. I don't really want it running on the edge here. So then this is the bottom of my bag, and I stitched across this and then went back and boxed the corners. So this is how we do that. A simple 1/4 inch seam allowance across the bottom. And you may want to do like a reinforced stitch if your machine does that, just a little bit as you start and stop. We are going to run across that seam with the boxing process, so it will be secured when we're done. But a simple 1/4 inch seam across the bottom so that we create kind of a sleeve at this point, but it can't stand up on its own at this point. So we are going to then box the corners here. One of my fabrics slid just a tiny bit, and I'm going to just correct that by trimming. When we have layers, we do have a little tiny bit of shift there that can occur, but since it's a bag and it's going in our suitcase, close counts. So we've got this. You can then do that zigzag along this edge or encase those seams if you prefer. But then we're going to do a bit of a fold in order to create these boxed corners that you see here. And that is by simply, I just did a little bit of a fold along the edges here so that I know where my side is. And then by inserting my hand and refolding, I can line up this fold with this seam and just simply use your fingers to feel the seam through there. So my fold line is on the back side here. It aligns with the stitching that we closed the bottom of our bag. And it is approximately, I gotta remember how many inches up I stitched. So from the point of your bag, 2 inches, 2 inches up the seam here. So measure from this point 2 inches over and draw a line there for your stitching to box the bottom of your bag. That's why the video portion is great, because sometimes it's kind of hard to give instructions on dimensional things. So 2 inches from this point over, and then draw a line, and that will tell you how where to put your stitching line. And once you have your stitching line, then you trim off that triangle. So you're going to trim off the remaining and then do a simple seam finish there. Again, you can zigzag that seam. You can encase it with a binding type of finish if you like. For me, a zigzag is totally fine. It finishes the edges and doesn't really bother me that it's got some raw edges. A look that's clean enough for me. Miriam says, hello. Love these videos. It's a beautiful day in Scotland. It's a beautiful day in Iowa too. I wish I sometimes could take my video to the backyard because the sun is shining today. The plants are also nice and green, and it's spring finally. Corinne says hello from France. We are glad that you're joining us. Loretta says hello from Miami, Oklahoma. Wonderful. Once you have your seams on one side boxed, go and do the same thing. Measure in 2 inches from the point and draw a line. You can use a small ruler to line that up to get it kind of straight. Again, it's not perfect. No one will know the difference. But once you have that done, all we have left to do is the top edge of our bag. So I turned my bag. I like to apply my binding kind of in the same manner as I would on a quilt. And the fun part about using pre-cut 2.5 inch strips is that these are perfectly cut for binding, ready to go. So wrong sides together, or press these in half so you can make your binding from a leftover strip. One strip will suffice. And then I applied my binding to the top edge all the way around, just the same in the same manner you would your quilt. And then I rolled my binding toward the interior. Now, some people will at this point say, I'm going to glue and stitch by machine, or I'm going to apply mine to the inside, roll to the outside, and machine finish that. Totally your choice. However you want to finish that top edge. I turned mine to the inside and just hand stitched it. I'm not so good at trying to do machine binding top stitch on there. So I just rolled it to the inside and it's ready to go. So I now have my little bag. Now, this, if you want to shorten it, think of this also like a thread bag for your sewing machine. You could put this next to your sewing machine in a shorter version, and it would be a perfect thread catcher at your sewing machine, like a little wastebasket. Or it could be shorter and it could be a sorting for binding pieces. It could be a thread caddy. There's a lot of ways you could use this. You could roll it down and make a cuff along the top and have it ready to go also. I forgot to talk about the option for extra quilting. I totally forgot that. When this is still open and flat, before you do your side seam, this seam that goes down the back of your bag, it's flat and open. This is the perfect place to practice your machine quilting. Totally blew that off. Okay, you can use your walking foot to practice doing some straight lines. And I did some straight lines. If you'll notice, there are straight lines down on the outside. I just wanted to highlight that pink thread. I thought that kind of went nicely with the pink strip that I was using. So I did some straight line first. And then I thought, but this would also be the perfect place to practice your meander or any other kinds of stitch that you've wanted to practice. So I meandered in all of the pink places, and I used pink thread because it's very forgiving. If you're a beginner, you don't want to see all of the thread as you begin that process of free motion quilting. So by doing a thread match to the fabric, you can have fun practicing in there. It's very forgiving that way. You don't see every little elbow or start and stop that may occur, or stitches that aren't perfectly even. So these are the great kinds of projects that as a beginner or even an intermediate who hasn't picked up to do free motion very much, this is a great place to practice that free motion quilting on something like this. We've got Lisa saying, love your fabrics. I love these too. That's why I use them. Let's see. We have, Margaret saying good morning from south of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Yes, our Canadians are in here too. I love it that when our quilters come from all over the world and join together with us in creating something beautiful. Our soul love beauty and color, and this is where our outlet brings us together to do that. And Kathy says hello from South Carolina. She loves making bags. That's a wonderful thing. And this is something easy you can share. You could give to somebody going on a honeymoon, somebody going on a big anniversary trip. Say, they're going to take more than one pair of shoes along than the ones on their feet. So a little bag like this. If you were concerned about wanting to put a closure of some sort on here, you could easily put a thin strip, a ribbon that could tie across. You could put a little tab that flips and adheres with a piece of Velcro. There are a lot of ways to solve that if you don't want just an open bag. But travel time. It's a project inspired by leftover strips and pre-cuts that you need to use up. Thanks for joining me.